Hey, it's the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. As promised, our bowl preview special. Now, last year when Penn State was 7-5, things were a little bit different. There were a lot of different scenarios that could go a lot of different ways. This year, kind of cut and dried. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to get the help of our awesome reporter who's been following all the bowl predictions, Greg Pickel. He's coming up on the BWI Daily Edition. BWI Daily Edition, here is the man himself, Greg Pickel. Greg, welcome to the show. I know that this is going to be a little bit different than last year, but honestly, last year our bowl show was one of my favorite shows we did all year. So I'm glad you're back to do this with me. And, you've been following along with all these things. So can you give us the broad overview of how this is you've seen this develop over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think our good buddy Nate Bauer hit the nail on the head that it's just a little bit crazy, T. Frank. And when I say a little bit, I mean a lot. So we've been tracking the bowl projections that, of course, national experts have been making for weeks now, actually months, since really September. And that was more of an exercise to be able to call up those projections from earlier in the year and get a sense for how things have changed over the course of the last, more or less 6 weeks as the season really came into focus around the middle of October. And T. Frank, no one was really projecting Penn State to go to a New Year's Six game back before the season began. Many did not see Penn State winning 10 games as the Lions did in the regular season. So it goes without saying that a team that many may have slotted for the Citrus Bowl or whatever they're calling the Outback Bowl these days or something along those lines quickly changed around mid-October. And of course, it's ping pong back and forth following the loss to Ohio State. And then the perfect November that Penn State had to really set itself up inside the top 10, of course, number 8 in the penultimate college football playoff top 25 rankings that were released on Tuesday. So at this point, we don't have as many options to discuss as last year. You're right, but we still have some intrigue heading into what will be a fun conference championship Saturday and then, of course, Selection Sunday.
So what we're going to do today, because Greg just set it up perfectly, is I'm going to ask him one more question, then I'll explain how we're going to set up the show so that you can kind of follow along and understand what's going on. First off, based on where Penn State is right now, is this kind of where they're going to be because conference champions are all going to determine what's ahead of them, or do they have a chance to maybe move up one more or two more slots if the right teams lose this coming weekend?
Yeah, I think it really depends on a couple of factors. One being, of course, what does Utah do against USC in the Pac-12 title game? Because Utah currently sits right in the same area as Penn State. But if they would beat USC for the second time this season, and that could move them ahead of Penn State potentially. But I think that, and we'll get into it then, but you're looking at a team there that could be a Rose Bowl participant depending on what happens with USC. So I think Penn State's probably locked in at this point. I think you would need some real craziness during conference championship weekend to move them out of 8 or up or down. But again, I think Utah's one team to watch in that scenario. But ultimately, these rankings look to be about set if things chalk out. And I'm predicting that they will chalk out. I wouldn't be surprised if we get maybe one or two surprises in some of maybe the AAC title game or something like that. But, as terms as how I look at the Big 12 and the Big 10, and of course the Pac-12, I see this chalking out this weekend and things being set as they are now.
So with that said, we are going to look at the two likely games that Penn State has that they could go to in the postseason. The Rose Bowl, which is every Penn State fan and every Penn State media member is crossing their fingers to go to California. And then the Cotton Bowl. So what we're going to do is, now that you know the bowls, and you probably knew that already, we are going to go and we're going to check out the teams that they might play, the most likely teams. We've broken it down into the 4 most likely places. So let's just get to it. Let's talk about the place that everybody wants to go, and that is the Rose Bowl. This is the game that Penn State has not been to since 2016. Greg, give us the scenarios of how Penn State gets to Pasadena this new year.
Yeah, so there's really 2 ways Penn State can get there, and both of them are going to require help, I guess you could say, from Ohio State, and of course, I guess Michigan as well. So and Utah's in that mix too. So the key is here one of 2 things. One being that Michigan, of course, gets into the college football playoff, which they're a big favorite over Purdue. I don't think anyone expects them to lose to the Boilermakers. So I do think Purdue can make that game close. I think they do some things, T. Frank, like what we saw them do to Penn State, they can give Michigan some problems. So I think I might take the points there, but I think Michigan wins. So let's say they are in the college football playoff. Well, now we got to see what happens with USC, because if USC wins against Utah, as we mentioned in the Pac-12 title game, they are in, and Ohio State is out. If USC loses, Ohio State could jump into the top 4, which would clearly give Penn State the pass to the Rose Bowl. There'd be no conversation to be had there. However, if Ohio State does not make the playoff, well, then the bowl selection committee, or the college football playoff selection committee, rather, and all these different bowl committees are going to have some choices to make, because there's a growing narrative that started really over the weekend with some folks in the Penn State media ecosystem, and then it extended to some national folks on Monday, though no one picked Penn State in their bowl projections to go to the Rose Bowl. But, I saw Ralph Russo from the Associated Press, Kirk Herbstreit on the College Football Playoff show on ESPN. There's this growing kind of buzz that the selection committee and the bowls that make up the New Year's Six might decide that, since Ohio State's been to the Rose Bowl so frequently, including last year, that their fans may not want to travel there. And because of that, it might make more sense to send them to the Orange Bowl and then send Penn State to the Rose Bowl. So I know that's a lot of kind of leaping around logic, and there's a lot of moving pieces there, but it really just it's this simple. If Ohio State does not make the playoff, then the committee must decide if it wants to send Ohio State as the highest ranked non-playoff Big Ten team to Pasadena again for the fourth time in 5 years. It would definitely be 2 years in a row. Or does it want to send them to the Orange Bowl, which of course has a tie-in with the Big Ten, and then that would make Penn State the highest remaining non-playoff Big Ten team in the rankings, and that would send them to Pasadena. So I'll be honest with you. If you read what I wrote at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com on Sunday and also Monday morning, I wasn't buying this at all, T. Frank. I really wasn't. Okay. My level of bought in is still not super, super high, but it's higher than it was. I guess I can boil it down to this. Sunday and Monday, I was willing to book a flight to Dallas for the Cotton Bowl. And as we talk about this here on Wednesday, I don't have that level of certainty anymore about how this is going to play out. So we'll see. I mean, the path is obviously there. It just comes down to what the Rose Bowl wants, what the Orange Bowl wants. Keep in mind the selection committee is in charge of slotting these games, but there's a lot of input from a whole bunch of different people. So the goal is, of course, twofold: the biggest television rating you can get, and the most fans on site you can get. And so
tradition be damned,
right?
Rules
exactly.
be damned. It's a TV show, and we're talking about something steeped in. The funny thing is, the Rose Bowl is the one that seems to nail it in terms of steeped in tradition, making for a good TV show. The rest of these bowls are saying we're steeped in tradition, and then kind of that's true. So this is kind of where you find yourself in this particular process. So let's say it plays out where Penn State does make the Rose Bowl. Their likely teams are USC if they just decide that Penn State's going to the Rose Bowl, right? So there is an opportunity for Penn State to go to the Rose Bowl against USC. Is that fair or unfair to say?
Yeah, so it just really comes down to this. Does USC make the playoff or not? I mean, if Utah beats USC, and that's kind of the tricky thing about all this. So obviously USC is higher in the rankings, and it would still only have it would still have those 2 losses to Utah if it loses to Utah. So you could make the case that Utah would jump over USC and be the Pac-12 champion and also the Rose Bowl participant. They're not going to make the playoffs at this point. So is there a way Penn State could play USC? Yes. Do I think it's likely? No. I mean, I think it would take a lot of mountain moving at this point. Like they would have to get, lose a very close game to Utah, and that would make the selection committee say, okay, they have really 2 tight losses against them, but they're the better team, so we're going to leave them higher up in the rankings. That's really the only way I can see that working. And again, that would be a lot of logic would have to be put into the kind of the mental gymnastics of how all that would play out. The simplest solution, I think, is, for Penn State in the Rose Bowl would be obviously Utah's an option if win or lose. And then, but Washington's right on their heels. So if they get blown out by USC, that's not out of the question. But those are your 3 Pac-12 possibilities to play the Big Ten. There's nobody else coming into the picture.
So let's talk about Utah then. Let's talk about that team and what Penn State might face, a team that went to the Rose Bowl last year, and no one seems to mind about that.
Right.
that they
No,
went
that's
to
a
the
great
Rose
point,
Bowl.
T. Frank. That's a great point. And now, look, I realize it is easier for Utah fans to travel to Pasadena. I mean, so I think that is in play. But no, I thought about that too. Is that there's no one beating that drum at this point, which is interesting. But I think probably again travel's a part of it. Utah, I'd have to go back and look, and I might be speaking out of turn here. I don't believe they have a great Rose Bowl history, or if they do, it certainly isn't to the level Ohio State has had.
No, so they joined the Pac-12, I think like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, something like that. So I think last year was their first time in the Rose Bowl. So this is their second time if
Yeah,
they were able to go, and that would be, obviously it's close. They have a fan base that travels pretty well, and it is technically within driving distance of Salt Lake City, although it is a grind from what I was told. So
I'm sure.
let's talk about the Utes. What do you know about Utah? How do you want to set this team up for if Penn State does get in the Rose Bowl? This is the most likely team that they'll face.
Yeah. So, again, I think that the question that everyone is going to have, and it relates to both this Pac-12 title game this weekend, but also the potential Rose Bowl matchup, is Cam Rising healthy? Is he healthy enough to play this weekend? And then, of course, we're talking about Utah's very good quarterback who is in the Heisman Trophy conversation for a brief period of time. Is he healthy enough to play? And then does he want to play in a bowl game, no matter what bowl game it is? Or will he be healthy enough to play in a bowl game, no matter what game it is? Because, T. Frank, I think you would agree, this matchup loses some luster if you don't have him on the field. I mean, he's a guy that can make the kind of plays that would help create, with Penn State obviously having an offense that can make explosive plays in the run game in particular. Rising's a guy that with the way that Utah passes the ball, the way he plays, I mean, you can envision.
They need him. They absolutely need him. So he's an interesting football player. He is the quintessential game manager in terms of the positive end of those things.
Yeah.
Sometimes he makes throws. So for those of you that know, and if you've watched the show before, you know that my wife is a University of Utah alum. We actually watch a good bit of Utah football. Cam Rising, Utah in general is the Iowa of the Pac-12. Strong running game. Tight ends are heavily involved. The quarterback is asked to not make mistakes and mitigate damage and operate the offense, and then they have a tenacious defense. So without Cam Rising, they really have an incomplete football team. They don't really have anything to fall back on, and they barely got by. I think it was Washington State without him earlier this year, so that's a huge thing. And you're right, in the Pac-12 championship game, that's a pretty big matchup between those two and making sure everyone's healthy for that game.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And I mean, that's what's hard about bowl season, T. Frank. And that's why when we're talking about setting up the best possible fan travel, the best possible television ratings game, there's a lot of layers to peel back here. This is why I think Nate gets so frustrated with the bowl projections and everything else. For those of you that listen to this show, he went on a fun rant. I think it was 2 Mondays ago, or was it this past Monday? I can't remember, but you want to go check that out at wherever you get your podcast or youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated. But I mean, there's a lot to figure out here, T. Frank. So let's just say he gets hurt in the Pac-12 title game, or it becomes clear before Sunday that he's not going to play in a bowl game. Well, does that change how the selection committee views Utah in terms of going to the Rose Bowl? Because, that obviously takes a lot of luster off any matchup, but certainly one against Penn State. So and then so you have Washington maybe waiting in the wings and all that. So, I mean, there's just a lot of layers to peel back here. And what we think we know going into the weekend, I know this, Penn State is playing in a New Year's Six Bowl. But as we've been talking about here, and if it's not become clear after about 15 minutes yet, it should, who they're going to play and where they're going to play, there are a ton of factors still to get figured out.
And that's what we're cutting through that, and we're just kind of previewing the most likely teams and giving you a thumbnail scouting opinion and report on kind of what to expect in these different scenarios. A couple other things that I find interesting about Utah. They are very similar this year to Penn State in terms of the way that these two teams operate. Here's an example. Dalton Kincaid is their tight end. One of the best tight ends in America. 850 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's their leading receiver. He's their pretty much their only receiver. They came into this year with 2 tight ends, Brent Keithy and Dalton Kincaid, as the lead receivers in their team. If that sounds a lot like Brenton Strange and Theo Johnson, it is. So very similar teams in terms of their offensive style this year. Defensively, I think the matchup of this game would be Manny Diaz versus Morgan Scalley as the defensive coordinators, because Utah puts a lot of DBs in the NFL. So 2 teams that have really good defensive backs. Clark Phillips III has 6 interceptions this year. He is questionable, I believe, for the Pac-12 Championship game if he can play. And then kind of previewing that matchup, back in October, on October 15th, Utah beat USC on the final play of the game. They went for 2 to win it, and they were able to get the 2-point conversion to win that game. Kind of the opposite of what happened to them in Florida in week 1. They have 4 running backs that have over 50 carries. So I'm not kidding when I say they run the ball and that's it, and then you throw in Cam Rising on top of that. They have a very similar football team. So I think in terms of fun games, this would be more of a defensive matchup. So if you could find a different team than one that's going to punch you in the face repeatedly until somebody wins, like it would be a bare knuckle brawl between these two. Yes. And I think that it would be one, though, that Penn State matches up well with, because I think they could put some pressure on that Utah offense with what they do defensively. But have you seen anything of Washington this year? What's your opinion on them if they were to be a team that Penn State saw in the Rose Bowl?
Yeah, I haven't dug in on them too much, T. Frank, just because of the way the college football playoff ranking shook out yesterday. I actually kind of talked myself into them a little bit while we were talking here on the air, which is always a good way to go into a podcast, but that is what it is. So hey,
I had a whole stack of notes on USC, and then I realized when we were talking, there's no way they're playing USC. They're in the playoff or they're not. That's it.
Yeah, and so I mean, again, there might be a small, teeny tiny chance, and I would love to see that matchup. That would be a lot of fun, but it's a very small chance. But no, Washington's been hot. I mean, look, they just beat Oregon and Oregon State back-to-back weeks. Oregon, obviously, the brakes are falling off there a little bit with the Ducks, but at the end of the day, they're a fascinating Pac-12 team, just in the sense that when you look at what they do, it's Penn State fans are familiar with it because they saw it in the Fiesta Bowl only a few years ago. I mean, this is not, they have not necessarily overhauled what they do, but the key with them is now they throw the ball more. They have Michael Penix Jr., the former Indiana quarterback. Penn State fans remember him well. And he has, I was pulling it up here because I didn't want to misquote. I thought I was right on this. Yeah, 4,354 passing yards. I mean, he has had a tremendous season, 29-7 touchdown to interception ratio. That would be a fun game to watch, T. Frank. They don't have a rusher over 1,000 yards, but they have 2 receivers over 1,000 yards. So that would be a game where you're going to see the strength of Penn State's defense, its secondary, match up against the strength of Washington's offense, which is throw the ball. So, that could be fun too, depending on how all the opt-outs and all that kind of stuff works. That could be a pretty fun matchup too.
Yeah, there is the Indiana connection, not only with Michael Penix, but I believe Ryan Grubb was at Indiana as well. Yep. So it's not an unfamiliar task for them to play that offense and that quarterback. And it would be fascinating to see Michael Penix Jr. healthy again against Penn State, because, last year when Indiana played Penn State at home and he was knocked out of the game due to injury, there's just a lot of interesting storylines with Washington and how that one would play out. So let's move on to the next bowl, and I think that you and I agree this is the more likely of the bowls, and I don't know that Penn State fans are going to be super happy about it, but it is the Cotton Bowl. Now, the Cotton Bowl is the bowl that Penn State went to back in 2019. How does this bowl work, Greg?
Well, so it's an at-large bowl, of course. So the Group of 5 champion, which that's going to be either Tulane or UCF, that game for the AAC title is going to be determined on Saturday. I think that game is one of the early ones at noon, but you want to check the TV guide for that. But, I mean, right now, that's where Penn State's projected to go. And if the College Football Playoff Selection Committee and the bowls do not decide to do what we just spent, about 20 minutes talking about and move Penn State ahead of Ohio State in terms of going to the Rose Bowl, Penn State will be going back to the Cotton Bowl for the first time since 2019 when it played a very good game and beat Memphis. So, yeah, this is the one that fans don't get as excited for. There's two reasons for that. Number one, the weather's probably not going to be as nice in Dallas as it will be in California, but
Yeah.
the opponent is kind of a bummer. A lot of fans look at it as a no-win situation. I don't know if I totally agree with that, but I certainly get the line of thinking that if you lose to Tulane or to the UCF, everyone's going to say, how in the world did you lose to a group of 5 AAC team? And if you blow them out or if you win, everyone just shrugs and says, well, yeah, you were supposed to. So I get that line of thought, but I think there's so much value in recruiting and in program building to go to one of these New Year's Six games to have your team experience it, that any of them are good to go to. Are some more enticing or exciting than others? Yes. But look around this Penn State roster. How many key contributors are going to be on the field for Penn State in 2024 when hopefully the playoff expands? And then all these New Year's Six experiences are going to be what the playoff teams experience should they get out of their early matchup. So, I mean, you want guys to know what it's like to be in these environments, especially your younger guys. And I think that, you know, anytime you can parlay that experience with, again, the recruiting bump you can get from winning a New Year's Six game, being a top 10, top 6 team, whatever it might be.
Is it winning? Is it winning or is it being in the game? Because this is something we talked about earlier this week, I think on the live show, and or at least on the post-game show when I was talking with Tom Hannafin post the Michigan State win, when all of this started being crystallized after it was officially 10-2, is it going to the game or is it winning the game? Because you're not going to remember anything about the game, and you're just going to go and do what I did when I was researching, is look for historical context of, well, they won that game. They didn't lose. You go back and you talk about the USC game against, in the Rose Bowl. That was an iconic game, and I think that Penn State playing well in that game matters, but they didn't win it. Like, in 15 years, I don't know if we're going to be remembering the fact that they played a great game. It would be that USC won that game. So is it just going to the game or is it winning the game?
So there's a recruiting bump I think you get just going and being on that national stage. I mean, I'm hard-pressed to believe that there's not some little sliver, T. Frank, of reason that K-Tron Allen and Nick Singleton are here because they may have watched Saquon Barkley run in that game. So I think you probably you get a little bit of credit for what you put on film. Now, if you put bad plays on film, obviously it's a different story. But, I think you do get some recruiting bump and credit for just going to the game. But, of course, when you win it and you keep your spot in the rankings and everything else, that obviously is going to provide you with a much bigger boost than just simply going and losing. So, again, I think that's why some people look at the Cotton Bowl the way they do, because, again, you're expected to win. And if you don't, it's not going to be used against you in recruiting, but it's certainly not going to give you a jumping off point to that January run, to the the old signing day rather, and also all the recruiting you do on 2024, 2025 and beyond guys in January. So I think that, if you win that game, then you're on national TV, you win that game, whether it's against Tulane or UCF or somebody in the Rose Bowl, what have you, I think you certainly get more of a bump. But ultimately, I think just being there on that stage, especially if you can put some big plays together that showcase for recruits and for transfer portal players what they could do in your offense and or defense, I think goes a long way toward helping build future classes.
Does it in terms of the bowl you go to, is the Cotton Bowl a cutoff for guys not opting out, do you think? Because that's the other part of this, is what's the team going to look like in terms of health? Is Olufashinu going to be back at that point? And then does Joey Porter Jr. play? Does Tig Brown play? You feel like the Rose Bowl, for sure, it's a stronger likelihood of somebody saying, no, I want to play in one of the most iconic bowl games. Does the Cotton Bowl give you that same at least a level, maybe not the same, but on the same level of, they'll want to play in a New Year's Six bowl?
I think this is going to be the year we learn that. And I hate to kind of edge my way out of the question like that. But, there's been a lot of talk about, Penn State opt out this, opt out that, didn't have this, that, and using the 2019 Cotton Bowl as an example. I don't really think you can. I think the conversation, T. Frank, has changed drastically around opt-outs and it being more acceptable and more common today than it
Mm-hmm.
was in 2019 when Penn State was playing Memphis in Jerry World. So, yeah, I think we're going to learn that answer this year. I mean, I look, are you going to have a couple? Probably. It wouldn't shock me, but it also wouldn't shock me if all those guys decided to play. I mean, again, it's a New Year's Six Bowl. It's one last chance to play with your teammates. Now, we remember even back to the Fiesta Bowl, Saquon Barkley clearly on a pitch count that day. There's no doubt about that. And it would not surprise me to see a guy like Joey Porter Jr., who appears to be a first or early second round pick, opt out. At the same time, it would not surprise me, and in fact, it might be favored if you were putting betting odds on this, that he would probably play, but play on a pitch count. Maybe play the first couple series, maybe play a little bit in the fourth quarter if it's close, what have you. But I think that is becoming more the norm for a lot of guys. Now, look, some will just opt out of New Year's Six games no matter what. But it seems to me that a lot of guys are deciding to stay and play, but they're doing so in a very limited capacity. So it kind of the best world for everyone where, the player can say, hey, look, I gave you guys my all. I stayed through it all. I was here for the practice. I was here with the team. I played in the game. And then you can say, thank you for all of that, but we'll make sure you don't play so much that you
hurt
getting
yourself.
Injured. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting thing considering the way the season ended as well. Because last year there were a lot of bowl opt-outs, and you're playing Arkansas in a bowl game. This is a little bit different. This team is 10-2. You feel like there's a different, I hate the word vibe, but yeah, this team is vibing a little bit different than the one last year, and that might provide you with that opportunity. So let's talk about the potential candidates. Tulane, interesting. Some research I did on them, and this is mostly based on stats. Again, not any video stuff, just an early preliminary thing. Michael Pratt, the Tulane quarterback, 24 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but one of the things, pretty good pocket passer, it seems. 23% of his pressures result in a sack, according to PFF. So if you're asking me, what's a matchup that Penn State could take advantage of? A dude that gets sacked a lot against a team that likes to get a lot of sacks. That's a pretty good jumping off point. Did you find anything interesting in what you saw or what, researching this team for their potential matchup?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put too much, I don't want to overstate what I've seen from them on a little bit I've got to watch them, because again, it would be a drastic step up in competition to face Penn State. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, this offense can go a little bit. And so I think that is really what jumps out to me. And I think Penn State could score some points against the Tulane defense. There's no doubt about that. So, I would be interested to see how that offense functions when, again, much like we talked about with Washington, and much like we've spent a lot of the season talking about, T. Frank, outside of Ohio State and Michigan, when Penn State has got into a situation where, and Michigan doesn't even really apply to this either, I guess it does a little bit, but, when you are in Penn State finds itself in a place where the other team can't really run and wants to throw, and it is throwing into the strength of Penn State's defense, there's not many teams that have succeeded in sustaining an offense good enough to beat Penn State at its own, at that game. So to me, I think that would be the Tulane Green Wave's biggest problem, is that they are going to want to do that, throw the ball, and Penn State is well equipped to stop it, both, as you mentioned, with the pass rush. And, it's funny, it wasn't all that long ago, T. Frank, that we were sitting around talking about the fact that, and asking James Franklin about the fact that Penn State, where are the sacks? Where are the sacks? Penn State doesn't have enough sacks. Penn State, was a team that was supposed to get more sacks going into the season. And then I'm pretty sure they finished with the lead in the Big Ten in sacks. I didn't actually go back and check that. They went into the regular season finale with that lead. So
they had, I think I was looking this up, they have 35, which I believe is top 15 in the nation in terms of total sacks.
37 they finished with. So 37. So number one in the Big Ten, Michigan had 32, as did Ohio State. So it's funny that we spent so much time talking about that, and they end up leading the Big Ten. They're one of the better teams in the country in that regard. So, ultimately, I think it'd be a very good matchup for Penn State. But again, I don't want to get too over the top with it, because Penn State, a 10-2 Big Ten team, should be able to have a good matchup against a Group of 5 champion, whether it's Tulane or UCF.
A couple other things on Tulane that I found interesting. Tyjae Spears is the entire offense. He has 14 runs, of over 15 yards. So 14 explosive runs, 500 yards on big plays, and he also leads the team in as one of the team leaders in receptions with 11 and a half yards per reception as well. So if it seems like, at least looking at the numbers, stopping Tyjae Spears is the answer to stopping Tulane. Good pass blocking unit, but again, like you said, stepping up in competition. All these things are going to be adjusted for playing against Penn State. They play in nickel defense, as a lot of group of 5 teams do, and seems like they're in the championship game, a well-rounded unit. UCF, John Reese Plumlee. 900 yards rushing on the season, I believe. So another team that wants to run the ball, probably the most dual threat quarterback Penn State would see. 13 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, boom or bust thrower. So another interesting matchup for the Nittany Lions in terms of taking the ball away, but also stopping the run. Something that I found interesting, Greg, is since Penn State has moved Abdul Carter to the spy position, they've allowed 69, I believe, rushing yards on scrambles. So they've shut down other teams' ability to run the football with the quarterback. And then, of course, in regular down and distance situations during zone reads and things like that, the defense has done a great job. So playing a athletic quarterback, which has been a problem for Penn State over the years in terms of contain, it seems like they found a good solution for that with an athletic freak just letting him run guys down in the open space. So those are kind of the teams that Penn State would see. We gave you 4 options during bowl season. Any last thoughts on UCF or the bowls in general, Greg?
Yeah, I kind of would like to see Gus Malzahn and James Franklin match up. That would be a little interesting, I think. So we'll see. I want to correct one thing I said. The AAC title game is at 4 p.m. on Saturday, not at noon, and it's on ABC. So if you're curious to look around and see what could happen with Penn State, you're going to want to keep a close eye on the Pac-12 Championship game, of course. The Big Ten title game at night. Actually, I think they're side by side at night. And then, of course, the AAC title during the game. But no, I would just say this. Be patient with how this all works out and expect the unexpected, because I'm not going to be shocked, T. Frank, if we wake up Sunday morning and all the bowl projections say cotton and then it's rose. I'm also not going to be surprised if we wake up Sunday morning and they all say rose and then it's cotton. So I think this is just going to be one of those ones where I think last year we probably came to a consensus eventually on Sunday about the Outback Bowl, and that'll happen this year too, but I'm not sure how early in the day that's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see how things play out.
Yeah, one of the things we've talked about over the last couple of shows as well is that because Penn State has such a strong track record of traveling to games and they have such a good TV brand, if you look up the top games each week, Penn State is either 1 or in the top 5. You know, for key matchups, they're the number 1 game, but then other games they're a top spot as well. So they travel well, they go well on TV. So for this whole TV show that they're building, Penn State is a great team to put in one of those spots. So if there's a chance that they're going to go to a better bowl, they're going to go to the better bowl. I think that's been kind of proven last year when they were not a great team and they got to the best possible bowl they could because they were Penn State. That'll do it for the BWI Daily Edition. Thank you, Greg, for all your insight, your information, and for keeping us on track with the facts here so that I could then go and play in La La Land and talk about potential matchups and who this and who that. So I appreciate you keeping the anchor for us as we could have floated away with this show. So that'll do it for the...
Always good to be on with you, T. Frank. Always good, buddy.
That'll do it for the BWI Daily Edition. Make sure you subscribe to us here on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back tomorrow with more and some busy days coming up here in December as the recruiting period is heating up. So make sure you subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com as well so you don't miss any of that. I'm playing this music for the out because I like this music. This is some good stuff. We'll talk to you tomorrow.